too, I'll see when people really feel a really strong sense of guilt around their financial success, they'll do things like take on other people's financial responsibilities, um, or the stress of the even if they're not actually paying for anything for people, sometimes they'll still carry the stress of it. But I've had many clients who are picking up the tab for relatives, for siblings, for parents. Um, and listen, if this comes from a place of like generosity, it's wonderful. But if it comes from a place of guilt and obligation, it's less so, and it really erodes a sense of self trust and makes you kind of feel taken advantage of. And I think that there's a really big difference there. So, um, helping people from your overflow and from generosity is really wonderful, and that's like um, different. It's different. It lands different in the body. It lands different in the finances than when it becomes overgiving when it feels from obligation or is really overcompensating for a sense of guilt. And so, one of the ways to shift through that idea is more or less to start to own the fact that like you're the person in the family like that's leading the charge on this. You can kind of take on like the idea like, oh, well, people in my family, like my nieces and nephews and children and, the next generation, these other people can start to look to me to have a different point of reference, because most of the time we're looking at the people in our families as like our points of reference for success or what family looks like and what money looks like. And so if most of the people are struggling, but there's one person who's not, it kind of teaches the rest of the family, like in a very visceral way, like that struggle is not the only way, and that people in my family are also allowed to get out of there. Because a lot of times, as you'll see when I get further along in the points, a lot of times when we're really stretching beyond our identity, it causes a lot of self-sabotage, and we can really pull ourselves back in. So that's one way to reframe that. So if I'm feeling guilty about doing so much better than the people in my family and like the people that, my friends, or I'm like outgrowing people financially, one way to do that is like, well, you don't necessarily have to outgrow them, but you can also start to own it, like, that you can be a person that other people can look to as like, oh, well, if she could do it, I could do it. Or potentially, down the road lend some money to your niece for starting her business, things like that. Be a person that people in the family can trust and can talk to. So that's the other side of it. All right. So also I will see a feeling, I'm going to call it, of like undeserving or not belonging. So sometimes when we grow up in a certain kind of way, anything that's really far outside of that norm can feel very uncomfortable in our body. Um, and that's regardless of whether or not we have enough money or whatever else. So typically what I'll see is like, so let's just say you grew up in one kind of way, and now you can afford to fly first class, or you can afford to stay at really fancy hotels, and that's something that you want to do. That may be very viscerally uncomfortable. You may be like wondering, like, do I actually belong here? Should I actually be here? Are people thinking I'm snotty, or are people thinking the things that I thought about when I was not in this room, but I was, like walking by the first class, the people on first class. And so sometimes that can be like just like a hang up for people around, like, do I actually feel like I belong here? And what I encourage when I work with clients, like this is inside my Limitless Wealth offer, like a lot of the times I'm working with clients on stuff like this, because if we have a lot of fear of judgment, fear of criticism, fear of not belonging, or fear of being left out, this discomfort can almost cause us to like regress and go backwards. And so there's not really anything to do about it other than to like be aware of the discomfort and start to breathe into it and start to get viscerally more and more okay, feeling like, oh, my mind is really like wondering if I belong in this room, but like the truth is like I'm in this room, so I belong here. And like just kind of being okay with the discomfort of it. It's almost like, hopping into a different temperature pool or something. It's like viscerally, it's going to be a lot as you make the shift. I'll tell you a story. I was at a mastermind event. This story is probably from like 2019. And I remember getting there and feeling so out of place, feeling like I didn't belong there at all, feeling like everybody was way ahead of me in their business and their personal lives, like feeling like I was just nothing and I just didn't really belong there. And as the week went on, as I got to know everybody in this mastermind, I started to be like, oh, these people, maybe their businesses are bigger than mine, but they're just like me. They don't have their shit together. Even though there was one fellow I met who's making a ton of money, like $35 million a year, having cash flow issues. And I was like, what? And then pretty much everybody I talked to had cash flow issues in their business. And it was just an ongoing thing. So it's like all of these things that I thought were problems, like so specific to me and my tiny little baby business, just when I really got to know everybody, I was like, oh, not at all, not at all the case here. So anyways, it's really learning how to be with yourself and care for yourself and the visceral discomfort of being someplace new. All right. So that's really what you'd have to do there. All right. The third thing that I'm going to talk about today is just the fear of loss. And so when clients came from a place, and I'm going to call, lower middle class poverty, when money was a struggle, when there was a lot of survival patterning, and now they're in a place where they could be thriving. A lot of times there's still anchors to that survival. There's still anchors to that survival mentality. And what I will hear people say is they're like, oh, I feel like the other shoe is going to drop. I feel like the rug's going to get pulled out from under it. Like I better make hay it's something like I better fill my barns with hay while the sun is shining. It's an expression of like, oh, I better like do some, I better stock up on some shit while the money's good. And it basically comes from a belief of like a fear of loss. And so what we can do there is honestly, like a lot of times we need to learn how to process our feelings. So many people who grew up where their family was in some flavor of survival, like you have to learn how to get that out of your body. And because money is so tied to survival, like in the actual world, a lot of times there may even be like some fight or flight responses that are stuck. So it may be emotional, but it also may be like, wow, I really feel a sense of panic when this is happening. So like when I'm working with clients in Limitless Wealth, I'm teaching on like emotional processing and how to work with our nervous systems to learn how to feel safe in thriving. Because if you have the money to thrive, but your body is only comfortable in surviving, it's almost like being too high. It's like, oh, if I fall, this is really going to hurt. And so that's where the fear of loss comes in. And so this does take a little bit of practice. You do have to learn how to process your emotions, and you do have to learn how to trust life, and that like more or less like you have to get to the place where you're like, if I lost all my money, like the experience would suck maybe, like, and I'd be able to deal with all of that for what comes up, but I would still be okay. And for a lot of us, like that does take some healing work, like healing in our nervous systems and in our minds and in our identities and things like that. Which brings me to my next point is, so one of the next things that we have to really work on when we're doing much better than our upbringing when it comes to our money is we have to start to shift out of those older identities and start to come into new identities. And so this is a thing where this is a very, very big deal. So like, let's just say you grew up lower middle class and now you are making enough money to be upper middle class or upper class. Well, all of those lower middle class, like belief structures and opinions, they don't just go away because you start making more money. And so our brain really wants us to be congruent with who we believe we are. And so if we have things on our identity, onto like our I am statements, like, people will say things like, I grew up poor, or I'm poor, as things like that, or I grew up lower middle class, or we really struggled, right? And so sometimes it's on a personal identity, sometimes it's I'm part of this group who also, like a group identity. So what we have to really do there is start to craft a wealth identity, which is another it's one of the five keys of limitless wealth is crafting a wealth identity. And it's one of the first places that we start because your brain really, really will make decisions that are congruent with who you believe you are. So if you believe that you're somebody who struggles with money, if you believe that money, there's never enough, and that part of your identity is this survival, you have this survival identity. And even if you have enough money to thrive, like it doesn't really stick. And so when that's the case, I'll see people making more and more money, but their fear goes up, their level of anxiety goes up, their money stress goes up, even though they have more money. A lot of times I'll also see people take on more and more expenses, so that way their cash is always really tight. Um, or people taking on credit card debt bigger. So it's like the more money they make, the more debt they have. The more money they make, the more they spend. And they potentially don't ever have any to get ahead. And I'm telling you, that goes all the way up the income level. And these people are smart and they're successful. This stuff really, really lives deep in the subconscious. And sometimes it's very, very difficult for our conscious mind to see it. And that's why I'm sharing this with you all, because I want you to realize, like, if this is going on for you, like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like when you are doing way better than your parents or your family or your neighborhood or your community, when you're outgrowing that, there's all of these little hooks to your past that are very, very real and really impact the way that you see yourself and the way that you make decisions. Um, and that's just the truth. So if this is going on for you, nothing's wrong with you. Like, you're doing everything just fine. And this is an area that does require some work, and it's a little deeper than just like average like money mindset. We're not really making these adjustments to the conscious mind and how we believe, like what we believe about our relationship with money. It really goes a little deeper than that, and how we see ourselves in relationship, which actually brings me to my last point. And so sometimes as we make progress financially or success wise or any flavor of material success, it can cause like a relationship strain as the people, like, so let's just say, we start here and we have a relatively equal amount of personal power between ourselves and like our families. Well, if I start making more money and I start getting more education, I start doing better, and I start having this level of, it's personal power, and then we start to see the material success that associates with that. That difference in power dynamic will be apparent to people. And you may hear things like, "Oh, must be nice." Because people will, you may be met with somebody's envy. Or it may also sound something like, "Oh, you think you're better than everybody." It's like because as that power differential becomes apparent, people can see that you have essentially more, and money's a flavor of personal power, but there's other flavors. But as you grow in any of these aspects, you may be met with people saying things like that to you because they can start to see the differential in the power. um and they don't like it, and that's fine. Like, and they don't have to like it. But if that's something that you weren't prepared for, it can really, really hurt your feelings, and it can really leave you questioning, like, oh, am I doing something wrong here? So what I suggest for people in that kind of circumstances is that, like, obviously we love our family, and we maintain our relationships. And also sometimes as we grow and expand, we also need to make new friends. We also need to find new people to talk to. We also just can't bring all of our problem, like, if you needed to bounce ideas off of some people, you may need to make new friends to be able to do that. You may not be able to take, your problems to your current friends, to your current family. You may need to make, some new friends. And I will also say that a lot of times people have a lot of fear of this happening, and also then their friends and family cheer them on and are really, really happy to see them be successful. And so it plays out both ways, and I think people have a hard time with it even if people are cheering them on, right? And that kind of goes back to the first point that we had around maybe feeling some guilt around doing better than, when you feel like you're thriving and other people are struggling, it can cause a sense of guilt. So Anyways, all right. So I just wanted to come on. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about these things because one, I think it's really important to be real with ourselves, especially when all of this stuff lives so deep in the mind and you're going and you have to learn how to really take care of yourself to be able to continue to grow and evolve. I mean, that's really, really what it takes. And so this particular thing is an issue that causes a lot of self-sabotage, a lot of slowdowns, a lot of fear, a lot of just getting in your own way when we have to, when when also there are consequences to our social life for our financial life getting better. And I think all of that needs to be really looked at, like, in the truth and like with honesty, because otherwise we'll very much keep it in the shadows and kind of trip over it. So anyways, all right, so I hope that was helpful for you. And if I'm really talking to you and you're like, holy shit, man, I've been in my own way, and you want to work with me on crafting a wealth identity, learning how to reprogram your mindset, really learning how to increase your emotional capacity, learning wealth energetics, and putting in clear money channels, I would love to talk to you. And you can find a link to my calendar in the description of this, and we'll hop on a call and kind of just go over like whatever you're working on and see, and I'll tell you the ways that I can be of service to you, and we'll go from there. All right. I love you so much. Thank you for hanging out with me. I appreciate you. Bye.